Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you all so much for coming this afternoon. My name is Devin Zimmerman. I am the curator of modern and contemporary art at the Ogunquit Museum of American Art, and I am so thrilled to welcome Cara Romero this afternoon to speak about her work. It has been a dream to get Cara to come to the museum. I was just letting her know that we have two photographs by Cara in the collection. They were the first two acquisitions I made as a curator at this museum, thanks to the generosity of Steve and Ellen Hoffman, and it really set a tone for the kinds of storytelling that we want to do at the Ogunquit Museum of American Art as we reflect on and try to expand these stories and these narratives about American identity, culture, in the broadest possible ways. The same kind of conversations that were animating Ogunquit as this place for artistic gathering for now over 125 years. So it is a real joy to be here today. I also want to thank the Leavitt Theater. Again, this is a new partnership for us, and they have been incredible. We have grown out of our wonderful museum because of the demand and interest in these programs. And this is a great first year to bring many of these talks into downtown Ogunquit, and I think we will continue to have more, including a talk next month on Monday, July 13th by Grace Yasamura, a dear colleague of mine, as well as a curator who was formerly with the Smithsonian Museum of American Art, who will be speaking on her project, The Shape of Power, an exhibition she curated among several curators last year. I also want to thank Art Bridges, who has been an important partner for the museum and a sponsor of all of these talks, which we have been able to offer to the public for free. So all that being said, and there deserves to be many more thanks, I wanted to introduce Cara. Cara Romero is an enrolled citizen of the Chemehuevi Indian Tribe, a visual storyteller, activist, and mother. She is known for dramatic fine art photography that examines Indigenous life in contemporary contexts. With extensive training in photography, her work is shaped by 25 years of formal study and artistic practice. Blurring the lines between fine art and activism, Romero tells stories of cultural memory, collective histories, and autobiography to convey the complex realities of contemporary Native peoples. Her work has been acquired by major institutions, including the Met, the MoMA, the Amon Carter, as well as the Forge Project collection. Romero travels between Santa Fe and the Chemehuevi Valley Indian Reservation, where she inherited her childhood home and maintains close ties to her tribal community and ancestral homelands through art and activism. And you can also see Eufaula Girls, one of the photographs that is in our collection, currently on view at the museum in our exhibition, American Conversations. So without further ado, let's give a round of applause for Cara.
Good evening, everyone. How does that sound, Hans? Is that good? Great. Okay. I just wanted to thank all of you for coming this evening. Thank you, Devin, for the invitation and the staff at the Ogunquit Museum. Thank you to all of you in the audience. I wanted to acknowledge Steve and Ellen Hoffman. Thank you. I know that you had a hand in getting me here. And I also wanted to take a moment to acknowledge my grandfather, who's in the audience up on the balcony. It's very special to have you here as well, Grandpa.
Thank you, Cara.
So my name is Cara Romero, and I am a contemporary Chemehuevi American photographer and artist. You can move to the next slide. I was born to interracial parents in 1977 in the Los Angeles area, and my family would move from the Los Angeles area to the Chemehuevi Valley Indian Reservation in about 1979, 1980. And the Chemehuevi Valley Indian Reservation is on the California side of the Colorado River, today known as Lake Havasu. It is one of the most pristine, undeveloped areas in the heart of the Mojave Desert and incredibly biodiverse and beautiful. And I would have a very biracial and bicultural upbringing, going back and forth between Houston, Texas, where my mom's family had relocated to in the 80s, and staying also close to my father's side of the family on the reservation. All of this would lead to going to school and public school and having this lived experience coming from a reservation in California that would inform this understanding that most people outside of reservations had no real understanding of how Native Americans lived, about that lived experience, about the continuum after the turn of the century. And so I really knew from a young age that I wanted to counter the narrative and correct the narrative about what contemporary Native life is like. Go ahead and move to the next slide. And I grew up with that knowledge of this incredibly rich narrative, this continuum of Native life in America that spans from the turn of the century towards the next turn of the century. But it was something that I never found in academia or in media or in the Life magazines or National Geographic magazines that I would grow up with. And I would find myself going to the University of Houston for cultural anthropology and Native studies and emphasis. I thought maybe I would write textbooks that I never had growing up about Southern California, Native American people, or even contemporary textbooks about my tribe that I had never seen growing up. Go ahead and move to the next slide. And in 1997, I was a junior at the University of Houston studying anthropology, and I would stumble into my first black and white film class, studying with Professor Bill Thomas, who emphasized content over technical ability. And this would be the very beginning of me finding a love for photography that has never faded over the last 30 years, a love of the medium to be able to tell stories in a way that words could not for me. And it would bring me full circle to a moment in my life where I did get to teach about contemporary Native issues, and I do get to travel to museums and to universities and counter the narrative that we're gone or from historic or bygone culture, but are actually thriving with a rich life that's part of the fabric of American history and contemporary American lived experience. Next slide. So I want to go through a body of work. I've broken it into themes that seem to come back up for me in my work throughout time, themes that help me tell some of those narratives in a way that's fun, that's genuine to who I am, and that is a great shift to have a Native woman behind the lens of the camera. It's a different edit, it's a different take on telling those stories, to have somebody from within culture able to tell those stories. The first section of the slideshow is Americana, pop culture, and our indigeneity. And you can move to the next slide. This set of work is all in color, mostly, and it is really about a culmination of all of those things that I learned in school, also moving through the use of just black and white photography that is from the turn of the century, so taking a look at work like Edward Curtis and some of the ethnographic photographers that really captured the imagination of people globally about what Native Americans are, about what Native Americans look like. And these photographs become so fascinating and so beautiful at the turn of the century that they did two things. One, they documented a moment in time for Native Americans, but they also stopped time. And it would take a very long time before Native Americans would find ourselves with the education, with the technology, and with the inherent rights to be able to go to school to learn how to tell our own stories through the photographic medium. And so now, really over the last 30 years and 40 years in my lifetime, we have the first Native American photographers and filmmakers working to tell stories from that lived experience. They are not black and white, sepia tone, devoid of modern context, but instead I am known for a use of color and contemporary lighting and contemporary narratives from pop culture, all of those things working together to help us understand visually very quickly that these are living Native peoples and living a life of joy and with sense of humor. We can move to the next slide. And so sometimes when you're blending 21st century ideas with our indigeneity, it's a way to, it's an entry point cross-culturally. We have a sense of humor, that we're astute in American culture, we're astute in pop culture, we go to school and learn American history, albeit without enough Native American history and lots of other stories from the fabric of America included. But we also understand Western art and Western stories. And so this is all leading back to kind of this mantra of like, we're still here and we have not been erased and are, you know, right here in really every state in the United States, living in urban areas, on reservations, and working very, very hard for a cultural continuum and for cultural transmission. We're protecting lands, we're protecting environment, and that is so much of the heartbeat behind my work. This one, of course, is a reference to the Beatles' album, Abbey Road. Next slide. So placing us in this century, this piece is Evolvers. It was taken in 2019 as part of the Desert X Biennial. There was a billboard takeover. It was a land-based art installation, and I took over 5 billboards on a highway between Palm Springs and Los Angeles on the Gene Autry Highway. It would be seen by 4 million people in about 3.5 months. There were no words for the billboard takeover, and the assignment was for the artists, 25 international artists, to respond to the landscape of the Coachella Valley, which is also part of the Mojave Desert. I was the first Native person to be asked to call and respond to the landscape from, you know, which my people are from. And so I worked with 4 young boys from my community, from the Chemehuevi Valley Indian Reservation, and they would become symbolic of both themselves, you know, 4 little tribal boys from the Coachella, the greater Coachella Valley and Mojave Desert, but they would also become symbolic for the spirits of the landscape. And so the series was called Jackrabbit, Cottontail, and Spirits of the Desert, a reference to the mythos of the area, of which there's mythos and creation stories all across the United States. Certainly the indigenous peoples from here in Maine have those stories as well. And they would be, our spirit beings would be responding to these gigantic wind farms, this very iconic landscape in Palm Springs of all of the wind turbines. And I thought it would be really funny to make it look like a sci-fi poster, like when they're running away from Godzilla or something like that. So it's really meant to be a little bit humorous, but it's also meant to be kind of a cautionary tale. And this is really a chance to pause and think about the development of infrastructure, to think about things like environmental impact statements, about environmental assessments to landscape when you find these areas and they've been assessed as having nobody living there or no animals are being impacted. Well, the washes of the Mojave Desert are actually the tide pools of life with a long arc of Native American history set in the backdrop. These large wind turbines will affect migration of many species of animals, some of them endangered. They're known to have effects on migratory bird migration, low frequency impacts that we don't understand. And so there's this tidal evolvers, which is doing two things. It's both embracing this renewable energy that we need in America, simultaneously to remembering to be careful as we continue to develop and create big energy in the backyards of people of color. Next slide. This one is on a much lighter note, much more fun. This is Coyote Tales #1, and Coyote is our fabled trickster across Native America. I'm not sure if he's up here on the East Coast, but I imagine he is. He's the character in our stories that teaches us how to live vicariously through his mistakes. He always shows up in stories doing the wrong thing, and so we learn by his mistakes how to not be gluttonous, how to not be impulsive, how to not make the wrong decisions. But he also speaks to our humanity as human beings, because although he's always making mistakes, we love him anyways. And so that is this character of Coyote. Now, when you're looking at the work, I wanted to get a little bit into technical this evening because a lot of people wonder how I make these photographs. And so it would be that formal training from the University of Houston first. I would go and leave the University of Houston just working in black and white film, and I would go to fine arts school at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I would continue on in the darkroom for another 2 years, but I would receive a degree in actually studio arts. And so that was painting, drawing with an emphasis in photography. Digital had not arrived yet, and so I graduated in 2003. It was really in its infancy, the arrival of digital. I would find myself at Oklahoma State University at a technical school going for photography technology. And that would be when I would learn every facet of photography technology that I had always wanted to learn but was not available to me really on this fine art film path. It was strobe lighting, it was large format film, it was color film, it was zone photography on film. It was also lighting. It was lighting both for still lifes on film, advertising photography, sports photography, editorial portrait photography. It was really all the different styles, and it would help me straddle that digital divide that was happening between 2003 and 2006. I will say that even when I graduated from Oklahoma State University, digital was still not seen as fine art. It was seen as something that was only used for commercial photography, but then over the next 5 to 10 years would not only lead to becoming as sophisticated and high resolution as film is, but perhaps surpass it in its ability of ease to create photographic artifacts, and then it would become finally known and acknowledged as fine art. And so I would find myself in the right place at the right time because I had learned it all. And I would also understand how to do everything that I possibly could in camera. And I would also know how to use photo illustration and Photoshop to take it almost into an otherworldly place. And so this photograph, everything is done in camera. I would take a large balloon light that I rented from a construction company. It's just off of the frame towards the right and further down. I would use a very long exposure, so that would allow the neon light and all of the ambient light just after the sun goes down to create the proper exposure. The red from the neon sign would seep over. And then in photo illustration, I would make the rest of the image even more red. I would take a star file and I would add the stars to the evening sky. And so just on the technical side, that's how this photograph was made, mostly in camera with a little bit of photo illustration to kind of bring it to that otherworldly, supernatural and everyday life type of storytelling that I'm known for. And this photograph would appear in National Geographic in either November or December of 2018. It was the very first National Geographic issue where Native Americans were actually taking photographs of themselves. So just think 2018 is the first year that National Geographic allows Native Americans to tell their own visual stories. Is kind of crazy, right? Anyways, we can move on to the next slide. This one is called TV Indians, and if I had to sum it up in one sentence, I would say it's a postmodern Curtis, right? It is meant to be sepia toned. It is a figurative landscape. Think Native Americans in their regalia, in the landscape. You kind of think of Edward Curtis, right? But we're not devoid of contemporary context. We've taken a stack of TVs out to a cliff edge on the Galisteo Basin, and then I have photo illustrated the way we have appeared in media for the past 60 years. So you would see this dreamscape, but kind of this stark contrast. You could spend a lot of time with this photograph seeing how we're portrayed in Hollywood. That's this idea of TV Indians. That's kind of a slang term for Hollywood Indians, if you will. And you can see how absurd our caricatures are throughout time with Tonto and Lone Ranger, with Little Big Man. Some of these caricatures are so problematic, but they're also somewhat beloved. And so that's another kind of moment to like unpack for us as Native people. There's also Ira Hayes raising the flag at Iwo Jima. There's some of our favorite Native American actors blended in. There's the detonation of the atomic bomb, which takes place in New Mexico, just above where 3 of these tribal members are from. I also use my friends and family a lot. And so 2 of the women in this photograph were also in the last photograph. And my son is in the middle of this photograph, as well as my, she's now 22, but she was, I think, 12 or 13. She looks a little annoyed on the far left, as teenagers do. And so that's how this photograph was made. It was intentionally made in sepia as kind of that response to Edward Curtis photography, which was something, this was made in 2017. It was something that museums were asking us to do a lot as contemporary Native American photographers, because museums would find themselves with this paucity of anything contemporary of Native American art simultaneous to having these incredible collections of Curtis photography. And so they were really trying to help counter the narrative that we were only historic and bygone. we can move to the next slide. And so I work in this idea of storytelling, stories that are untold, stories of how we fit into subculture, how we're living our best lives, how we have sense of humor. This is a group of, I haven't counted them, but maybe like 9 or 10 Native women. We all love to roller skate. We love roller derby. And so we're just playing dress up together in a roller rink there in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We can move to the next slide. And this one is called The Last Indian Market. And this piece is, of course, in reference to Da Vinci's Last Supper. It has 13 contemporary Native artists being theatrical. And I would work to really, I'm very known for the staged and theatrical. So as we find our voice as artists and photographers, we do what we're good at. And so this idea of staging a moment is one way that photography can be used for fine art. It's very different than photojournalism and some of those other industry standards, but these are all very staged, and then they kind of grab into other areas of photography. So not just fine art photography, but here you have 13 contemporary Native American people documented in one photograph. Buffalo Man in the center, he is a performance artist. He's also Marcus Ammerman. Buffalo Man would become his alter ego in performance art. So it's also a testament to one of our favorite performance artists, Buffalo Man, who would appear in several of my photographs through the years in kind of these iconic images. And it would become a way that I would use photography to kind of indigenize the medium and make it make sense for us. So we can move on to the next slide. I am a strong woman, and I was raised by very strong women on both sides of my family. And so as we work as artists, so much of that autobiography comes forward. Women have historically not been on the other side of the camera. However, that's changing really fast in the last 10 years, where women photographers are really not only telling their own stories, but becoming incredibly astute in the medium, telling beautiful photographic images. It's really important who's on the other side of the camera for the edit and for the post-production and for the content that would come forward in the artifact, in the photograph that is then published. It comes from a different place, particularly when we're dealing with subject matter of our bodies, of being Native women. It would be very different, very objectifying, very sometimes dehumanizing. When you're from outside of culture, taking photographs of Native women, it's something that looks very different when I do it compared to when other people do it. So let's move to the next slide. This would be Arla Lucia, the American hero that we all really need right now. I come from a generation where our grandparents would be very patriotic. Native Americans serve in the armed forces and in the US military at a wild percentage of our population, despite the known history of how we've been treated with civil rights. And so a lot of the scholarly dialogue is around we come from warrior societies, and as we would be forced to assimilate into American society, many of our men and even our women go on to serve in the military. We grew up with pride in the American flag, many military services for our tribal members, And so this is kind of not only an honoring of Wonder Woman, who is like an earth goddess, right? She has this inherent strength that most women don't have, but it's also an indigenized version of this great American hero. We can move on to the next slide. This one is Ka, and each of these photographs are named after the person. So as opposed to being Hopi woman by the river or Navajo woman with no name, these are all named after the individual human being that they are portraying, and they have their editorial identity informs what the photograph looks like. They're highly collaborative. This piece came from an anecdote about the spirit of clay woman, that is a spirit found in the clay in the Southwest, that's warm and inviting, that no man or woman can ever master. And I thought that this was a great metaphor for how women feel about themselves and about their bodies. Ka Falwell also comes from a dynasty of great American ceramic artists of the Southwest. She makes ceramic vessels and paints ceramic vessels, as does her mom, as does her aunt, as does her grandmother, and millennia back. So these stories kind of become like even coyote tales, like how this mythos comes through time and is dropped into a person's nature. And then technically, this piece was a study for me in the capture of light and time. And so in school, we would learn about the very famous photographs of maybe like capturing all of the horse's feet off of the ground, or the famous photographs of the splashes that, you're capturing the liquid popping up and what that looks like with macro photography and having enough light, or the bullet splitting the apple, right? These are all. And so how is that done was something that I really wanted to show as this catalyzing moment of when she is flipping her hair up in the air. It would be photographed at 1/8,000th of a second. That is a shutter speed that you can actually attain with technology. It's a high-speed sync, and it would take every light in my collection as well as my buddy's collection syncing together. So it's like brighter than sunlight in the studio when all of the flashes go off at the same time in order to get enough light to render on the full frame at 1/8,000th of a second. So that's how this photograph is made. Her body is painted in white clay from Chemehuevi Valley. And then in photo illustration, Photoshop, I would take a second photograph of a Mesa Verde vessel, and I would lovingly wrap around the contours of her body this second high-resolution photograph. And I'm also looking at the late 60s photography of John French when he did those beautiful black and white photographs of the florals. You can think that the florals are projected on the models' bodies. And so some of this is like informed by, film, and then, really wanting to tell these contemporary stories of Native people. We can move on to the next slide. This one was done in my son's room, and I would be sitting in the closet trying to get far enough away. And so there's just this love of the medium and this ability to be incredibly creative with very little or a great deal of technology. A lot of people ask me what kind of camera I use. I can't remember the letters and the numbers all the time. It doesn't really matter what kind of camera you're using. It's if you know how to use it. And so this was done in 2013. I would not have a ton of equipment. I had a couple of hot lights. So these are not done with strobe lights, and I would set up the hot lights around the model. and I would pin an antique Navajo blanket up to my son's wall, and we would create this incredible image with repeated pattern with earth tones. Her name is Nikki. We can move on to the next slide. This next series is First American Girl Dolls. It would become First American Dolls. It was really informed by having an 11-year-old daughter in 2015 and not having a great selection of dolls that she would be able to identify with. There was one First American Girl doll that was Ojibwe, and sometimes we would have fun making Cochiti doll clothes for this doll, or maybe even Cochiti furniture for the doll. She had come from multi-generations of doll collectors, so her grandmother would be a quintessential Berkeley girl, and she collected the porcelain dolls with the ringlets and would have all of the different attire and accoutrement for the doll. And then her dad, my husband, collects action figures. And these were 1960s full-size G.I. Joes. But what fascinated me, and what still fascinates me about the G.I. Joes, is that they were so historically correct, accurate. They were made with such love and such attention to detail. And so now imagine yourself looking at Halloween costumes of Native Americans and how reduced we are for the type of regalia that we wear, how we're reduced to maybe just one imagery of what we look like and how we dress, how we're reduced to not the type of incredible mastery of artistry that goes into our regalia making. And so I decided that I was going to make my own dolls that had love and historical accuracy. This one is called Wakia. She is Kiowa and Comanche, and she's wearing a traditional Southern buckskin dress that would take 5 family members a year and a half to bead from head to toe. She's got backup moccasins and shawls. And this is the attention to love and detail that it takes to create regalia for any one person to be able to participate in dance and ceremony in their community. We can move on to the next one. This one is Naomi. She is Northern Chumash. She is surrounded by her own vernacular. The black and white designs are symbolic of the pine cone, the Bristol pine cone that's found in Central California. That's the center of cultural resource, their food. She's also got them strung around her neck as jewelry. These are pine nuts. And her mother is one of the most celebrated regalia makers in all of California, who also happens to be one of my best friends. And so you can see a mallard duck belt, you can see clapper sticks, you can see tule, a reference to one of the materials that they use. You're beginning to see this attention for love and detail. Next slide. This one features Golga. He's an incredible traditional artist. He is a Yupik from Alaska, from a tiny village. English is his second language. And he would find himself at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe. He is a keeper of cultural knowledge, and he is sewing together all of these seal furs and vermin, and he would become so good at it in his 20s that tribes and villages from far away will drive their snowmobiles hundreds of miles to bring him their furs to make regalia for the rest of the community. And so he's made everything that he's wearing, including the smaller doll that he's holding with him. We can move to the next slide. This one is Julia. This is my husband's cousin, or more loosely niece, from both Cochiti and San Ildefonso Pueblo. They have turquoise and pumpkin clan. And you'll see the Cochiti pottery designs have designed her doll box her grandmother's blue corn that is still grown in their fields today, her grandmother's baskets from her kitchen incorporated into the piece, as well as my husband's grandfather's drum from around the turn of the century. We can move to the next slide. More recently, I was able to work with Kanaka Maoli students from the Dartmouth campus, and we made one of Kanaka Maoli dolls as well. We can move to the next slide. And so that is the first American dolls. How am I doing on time? Doing good, okay. So environment. Environment really for me is about telling untold stories as they impact Native American people throughout American history. They're stories that are purposefully absent from academics, from US history, from your state history. But without these stories of environmental impacts to contemporary living Native peoples, we end up with big question marks. We end up with misunderstanding of how Native people came to live the way that we live on a reservation system, fighting for clean water at Standing Rock, dealing with environmental impact statements at every turn. It's so much about protecting pristine environments and trying to keep our ecosystems intact as much as we can in the face of the constant development of new housing that impacts things like endangered species and waterways, but even more than that, representing a voice to countering the development of big infrastructure on Indigenous lands, as well as resource extraction on Indigenous lands. And this is something that Native Americans face. Indigenous peoples steward 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity. But it's a story that needs to be told so that there's another side about why we're fighting things like drilling in the Arctic, why we're fighting to not put an oil pipeline under the Cannonball River. And so these are constant battles that we face. Our tribe is dealing with environmental impacts from flooding of the Colorado River and the dam project that would take place during US Reformation, and needing to build and create energy security with hydroelectric energy. You see where that has led us to 100 years later. We have big problems with the damming system in the Southwest. I don't know the issues in this geography of the United States. Anyways, so environment becomes really important, but really telling stories that I don't found told in many places. You can move to the next slide. This piece is from a series called Water Memories, and there is one in the American Conversations show that's up at the Ogunquit Museum right now. This series was done in 2015, and it was a response to these stories of flooding, both historical, present day, and in the future. And so this one would be, I went to many friends and we talked about these stories of flooding. I'm from the California side of Lake Havasu. Chemehuevi Valley is really under Lake Havasu. I don't even know why they call it valley anymore. We're up on a windy, rocky, salty mesa where we can't grow agriculture, where the fertile landscape is now under the river, including many cemeteries, homesteads, sacred sites are all under Lake Havasu. The same is true of Lake Powell, Lake Mead. You get the idea. And this features two Pueblo people representing a story from Santa Clara. So after the Las Conchas wildfires, the Santa Clara village would begin to flood in a way that had never flooded in the past. And so these are a response in 2015 to climate change, to both historic flooding as well as present day flooding. One of the things that this series really taught me about making art is that you can have an imagination, and you can have an intention and a desire to tell a story, and maybe just like something in your mind. And I would create these underwater photographs, but I think the nature of our relationship as human beings to water and to flooding, the series would become something much bigger than my intention. And I like to tell where it was conceived of, but I think I also like to let people come to artwork with their own experience, and maybe their subconscious does something else, and this photograph then becomes something more about life cycle, about our unknowable relationship to flooding. It can be much more than just my intention. It can be what it causes you to feel as an audience member. And so I just like to say that about these pieces, because not for everybody does it feel like something about climate change. Next slide. This is the one in American Conversations at Ogunquit Museum. This is Eufaula Girls. Eufaula is another area in Oklahoma that was flooded in the name of hydroelectric energy and, dominion over our watersheds, and it would flood Muskogee Creek people out of their homelands. Like I said earlier, I really enjoy working with friends and family because it helps me as a photographer in the collaborative process and in staying true to story. And it's not that hard to find somebody, even intertribally, that has a similar shared story or an impact that either their grandparents or their parents or themselves have lived through. So while I was thinking about Lake Havasu, it would turn out that my stepdaughter and her mother are Muskogee Creek, and we would tell the story of Eufaula Lake in Oklahoma. And you'll see different regalia in each of these pieces, and each one speaking to a story. It's this much of the stories of flooding in US history that impact Indigenous peoples. We can move to the next one. This one is called Oil Boom, and this one features Chinupa Hanska Luger. He's a well-known contemporary Indigenous artist. He comes from two tribes, Fort Berthold, which is Mandan, Hidatsa Arikara, which is in the Bakken Playfield in the Dakotas. He also hails from Standing Rock. So both the tribe upriver and the tribe downriver. The Mandan, Hidatsa Arikara were forcefully confederated. There are three different tribes that did not live together, but in the formation of their reservation were forced to live together. They would force them to live together at Fort Berthold, and they would flood them out to make Lake Sacagawea. They would end up on a chunk of clay, and then they would find oil, right? And so we look at tribes across America, and we say, well, they're indigenous. How in the world, or why in the world would they be living on oil economy if they're so passionate about protecting their environment? It's a story of economic survival. And so that is what I mean when I say that I want to tell stories that people may not know and are hard to come by, because it humanizes us and it gives us an entry point to understanding. And so Fort Berthold is drowning under the environmental impacts of oil economy. It's a very haunting image, but at the same time, very peaceful. And I think with a lot of the work, I think a lot of artists don't feel like they have to have the answer, but it's so incredibly important for us to just think about things that we would otherwise not think about, not to hide stories, not to evade truths of American history, but simply to tell them through observation. And it's so much the responsibility of the artist to be able to do that. And I just appreciate the museums for also telling those stories. I'm really excited to come over and see the American conversations. I was just having a conversation with Devin behind the stage about how important it is to have American conversations. So we can move to the next slide. This one is called Oil and Gold. Oil and gold is the resource extraction and would cause the third wave of brutal colonization of California in the name of oil and gold. There are many, many small tribes in California. It's the way it always was. There was a great network of trade, incredible cultural resource, and the waves of colonization would go from the Spanish missionaries to the Mexican War, and then the 49ers coming over in the mid-1800s that would cause the largest genocide in U.S. history. Between the years of about 1848 to 1863, our population of Native people in California would be reduced to less than 10% of living Native peoples during that time. So it's quite amazing that any of their descendants are still around. California has one of the most brutal colonial histories that is not told in the United States. So this is a cautionary tale. This is my daughter and my best friend's daughter, Naomi, that was in the pink doll box, and they're standing in front of a refinery in El Segundo, and one's regalia is dipped in gold and the other is dipped in oil. And I think the body language is like to say stop and look what we've done was kind of, where we're going with the body language. But it's also an untold story that people are still fighting to this day for federal recognition in California. And there would be 55 tribes whose federal recognition for their individual communities was not ratified by the state senators in California. And so you have a lot of critical dialogue in California between federally recognized and non-federally recognized tribes. In addition to that, 18 or 19 of those tribes along the coast of California, and the most expensive real estate, or some of the most expensive real estate in the United States, never received their federal recognition. So you can kind of see where I'm going with this. They were purposefully not ratified by the state senators of California and dispossessed of their land and their rights. They still gather to this day. They still have a cultural continuum to this day and still fight for their federal recognition. I believe there have only been 2 tribes in the last 50 years that have received their federal recognition in the state of California. We can move to the next slide. This was done during the same time. This also belongs to the collection at Ogunquit Museum. This features my daughter. This was taken during the pandemic when we were no longer able to work in community, when I was no longer able to work in community. And I didn't know what I was gonna do, but I do know that art making keeps me spiritually happy. And so as artists and as mothers, we move through finding creative time and finding the ability to make art. And so I would ask my daughter if we could work on a series we were stuck in the suburbs during the pandemic, and I would move our family to Hermosa Beach for 3 months because the kids were on their computers, and I thought, maybe we can just go out to the beach every day and be in open air, and we could work in our pod. And we would go out for every day for 3 weeks at sunrise and at sunset. It was very exhausting for my daughter. And my husband and my son would hold the strobe lights. They don't have to be plugged in, they're battery operated. And I would think about that capturing motion on the high-speed sync. And out of thousands of images, there would be this moment where my daughter was standing there and the wave would hit and the wave would splash up before she even had the moment to react. This is the only one out of thousands of photographs that looked that way. And there's the old adage among photographers, and I think all people, like, the harder you work, the luckier you get, right? And so this would be just this incredible synchronistic moment where my daughter would look like an absolute goddess. And it's called Hermosa. It's the beach that it was taken on. It's the word for beautiful in Spanish. And it would bring us back to this place of, in the Los Angeles area, finding areas that were not impacted by development or mansions. They're very small and sometimes privatized, these areas in California. So we were looking for small pockets that had not been developed. We were really wanting to tell stories of how so many of our cities in the United States, while they may be like wildly overdeveloped or have these crazy energetic histories of the United States, Los Angeles is also one of the most sacred places in Indigenous creationism, right? It is a source of life for people for thousands of years, far before the United States ever came to be. And so these images kind of become a memory of, again, that mythos that is passed through time, that's still all around us, is a native worldview, that while we might be living in a very different way, these stories of Indigenous history are still all around us. We can move to the next slide. This is Weshoyo, that is her name. I believe it means 2 stars, and she is of Tongva descent. Tongva, Ahashmem, the Gabrielino, to Tatvium, Uhaviatam. These are all tribes that are indigenous to the Los Angeles area. Only one of them very far inland having their federal recognition. But I wanted to show that while we may not know about the original peoples of a land, there are often cultural continuums of people practicing, of people making regalia, of people revitalizing or preserving language, songs, dance, indigenous sacred areas, and the Tongva are no different. The Tongva Gabrielino people are no different. So they are Pacific peoples. They, of course, fished and gathered abalone, and this is kind of a dreamscape of Weshoyo remembering her grandfather, and he was an abalone diver there in Los Angeles. So these pieces are photographed underwater, the Water Memories ones. This one is also photographed underwater. They make housing for your camera. It's watertight, kind of looks like Jacques Cousteau. It's got like a big dome across the front, and you can free dive with this. So this is done free diving in a pool in Long Beach. It's much less glamorous than what it looks like on the other side of it. But this is, my love of the medium is like creating these worlds in a 2-dimensional space that have so much life in them. we are working in a studio pool, so that's like the deep end, the studio pool. And we've dropped a black tablecloth down the side. So instead of the pool being like the white cement, we've created a black tablecloth with a little weight at the sewn in to the bottom, like, like fishing weights. And so that black tablecloth drops down and around the outside of the swimming pool. And she'll have a light on the outside of the pool with like an amber gel. Can you see the amber light?
Can we get, yep, there we go.
So you can see the amber light in her hair, and then on the front of her, a daylight balance. So her skin color is coming through. And then in a second photograph, we've thrown the fishing nets in there. And so so it's the two photographs placed together, if you will, and that's how this photograph is made. We can move on to the next slide and section. So Indigenous futurisms, I'm going to go through these a little bit fast because I do want to be able to have time for Q&A. So much of my photographic practice has been countering this narrative. From the turn of the century, the mantra for the American Indian movement is "we are still here." And about 10 years ago, Indigenous futurism alongside Afrofuturism, Latin futurism would begin to emerge. And it's such a poignant moment for artists working in marginalized cultures that are not the mainstream in American museums. This is the first time that we're not just surviving in our art and telling those stories of survivance and presence, but now we're moving into the future and telling stories of future. So you can think back to all of the sci-fi that maybe we grew up with, and you can see how those stories of Indigenous futurism, of Afrofuturism, of Latin futurism are not present in the same way it has been for dominant culture. So this is an exciting movement that we're seeing a lot of conversation around between artists. Artists are having conversations with each other, and this, like in visual mediums, that's so much about what we're doing. I wanted to join in the conversation of Indigenous futurism, and I was really looking to so much of what my peers and other contemporaries were doing, and trying to trying to think of my own narrative. And so what I would think of is those ideas of what we have worked so long to preserve and protect, albeit how culture changes all the time. Culture is both, change is the constant, right, as we move through time, but there's also things from each of our cultures that are ever permanent, things that we don't like to change, that we won't change, that become part of tradition, that would become part of our identities from different communities. And so we can move to the next slide. So my work in Indigenous futurism is really that idea of speculative futurism, which is, what is it gonna look like? Which is kind of fun and campy and sci-fi for me. We have the blue girls and the dry ice and the twinkle lights, but digitally photo illustrated are these really these designs and vernaculars from each of their tribes that have come through time for thousands of years. And so in this take, they're not beating them, they're not painting them, they've actually tattooed them, they're wearing their tribal designs on their body. And they were made to be both very playful in this idea of speculative futurism, but also to remember the things that are most important to us. The wires coming in are not about being connected. They're really about the earth and the planet and the people needing the knowledge of Indigenous women. They are the keepers of our sciences in Indigenous communities. They're the keepers of our basket weaving, of our farming, the savor of seeds, the design work, the heads of households, often our communities. So it's really uplifting Indigenous women in a way that I don't see happening as quickly as it needs to happen. We can move to the next slide. This one is called Gikendaso, which means she is knowledgeable or she is educated in Ojibwe, Anishinaabe language. The wires coming in, of course, needing her knowledge. And then in her sunglasses, I don't know if you can see it, they are dancing dances that they've danced for hundreds of years in the woodlands. So while she's in the future, she's seeing them still dance in the woodlands the way that they've danced for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. And she's from the shores of Lake Michigan. The next three are from a series named Alika. Alika is Afro-Indigenous. A lot of times when I'm making artwork, even as a contemporary Native person, I'm looking at things within our own community that haven't been done and asking why. So not just looking cross-culturally between non-Native and Native, but also looking in my own community and unpacking things that need a new narrative or need to be addressed. And so within our Indigenous communities, we also experience a lot of anti-Blackness. However, we have a lot of mixed race ancestry. We have a lot of Afro-Indigenous citizens and community members, but I'm not seeing it in our artwork and kind of have my finger on the pulse of contemporary Native art. So Alika is now at USC. She's an Afro-Indigenous futurist filmmaker in their amazing program at USC. We started talking about what it is to be a Caddo citizen raised in the Bay Area. She's kind of also got that bicultural upbringing that I do, but different. And so we started talking about what is a fusion between Black American culture and Caddo culture look like. They have these incredible paintings by T.C. Cannon of ghost dancers. They have Caddo painting, body painting that goes back historically in their tribe. And then we wanted to reference her and I are the same age. We wanted to reference Tribe Called Quests, very famous album cover from the 90s. And it was from Low End Theory. So if you were to look up Low End Theory, you would see the neon painted in the Pan-African colors. And then she's painted in the Caddo designs with the Pan-African colors. So we're really blending those same ideas of like 21st century hip hop culture, Black culture, along with her indigeneity. These were done simply with neon body paints and blacklight and like a little bit of slow exposures on a tripod with a high ISO setting. Usually a high ISO setting will make it kind of gritty or grainy, but it worked so beautifully. These look like paintings. I had no idea they would turn out so cool. So we can go through the next three. You can go ahead and switch the slides. We would have the beautiful reclining woman, and you can move to the next slide. And so these are all of Alika. There were 5 in this series. She's an incredibly sculpturesque human being. You can move to the next slide. Okay, no, you're here. Zenith, we're talking about the preservation of heirloom corn, so not so interested in how fast technology is going to be. We're not concerned about AI. We're not concerned about Wi-Fi speed. We're concerned, like, are we still going to be able to grow our corn? Because we as human beings are going to be in a lot of trouble if we can't do the very simplest things based in our human relationship to land and our ecosystem. So, while these are fun and playful, they're also really meant for us to be thinking about what are the oldest things, what are the oldest place-based things where we're from, that it is really not only Native Americans or Indigenous people's responsibility to protect, but really all of our responsibilities to protect, against biopiracy, against climate change, against environmental degradation. We're going to be in a lot of trouble as a human species if we're not able to protect these things collectively. So you can move to the next slide, and instead of telling you how I make something, I wanted to kind of show you. I think if you press play, it will play. This is an average day in my studio if we're making. I'm not in the studio anymore, but we actually hand-tied every single one of the corn up to a grid above the model. So that's kind of that blend of the nature of film and the nature of working digitally as well. And so just wanted to give you guys a little bit of insight to the pretty fun side of being in the studio and getting to play with your imagination as a grown-up. It's the best part of my job. Great, thank you. And we can move to the very last slide. Or was that it? Okay. So this is Coyote Girl in the future. This was taken last October and was done all in camera with the exception of the northern lights. So we brought out a fog machine. We're telling the story of Coyote Girl is a lesser known one, or Coyote Woman, or basically what I'm trying to say is the female character. So the male character is kind of dumb and always doing the wrong thing, but the female character is very cunning and she's very clever. And she, like in nature, is much stronger than the male counterpart. She's taking care of all the pups, and in our mythos and our stories comes across as not the goofball that the male character is. And so I thought I would tell a fun futuristic story about Coyote Girl. That ends my presentation for this slideshow. Thank you. And we're going to move to a Q&A, so it's a chance to ask any brave questions you might have. I'll talk a little bit about what I'm doing now. I've gone back to working with film, and so I've been using medium format film. I'm still doing creation stories from our imagination, mostly working with our kids back at Chemehuevi Valley. And it's been a little bit slower and more intentional working with film, but we're also working with traditional materials. So we're making their costumes out of yucca, we're making their costumes out of clay, and I'll go back this October to do my next shoot. I just did a commission for Phoenix Art Museum. You can see online about Coyote Woman appearing in Arizona, and I'll have another piece for Santa Fe Indian Market about a bobcat girl. So, thank you.
Hold on. Oh, yep, there we go. Cara, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was incredible. Are there any questions from the crowd? Please feel free to raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone over. Okay.
Hi, I was wondering, how long does it take you to, like, when you come up with the idea to, like, get through it?
That's a great question. So I think, I mean, I would probably like average it out. Sometimes like 2 or 3 months, but it's actually a really interesting question, so if I can just take a little bit of time on it. I feel like my artwork and how I made it changed when I became a mom. And I think that that's so true for so many artists, but I found myself, you know, when I was younger, walking around with my camera all the time, and I was in the studio, and I was in the darkroom all the time, And then I would become a mom, and I would think I'm not allowed to be an artist anymore. But actually, through that kind of problem solving that I was talking about, I would begin to like imagine these ideas, and maybe I had time to work on it in a sketchbook. And then I would have time to layer more ideas about what it might look like. And then I would have time to build on that in my imagination while I was washing the dishes. Or, you know, I would be off daydreaming while I was doing the mundane activities. And then I have a wonderful husband that helps me like clear the calendar so usually my shoots take 2 or 3 days. I've been thinking about them for a couple months. Deadlines are my best friend. So if I have a show coming up, the ideas start to, you know, come a little faster, and I got to get it done. And so there'll be this big 2-day shoot. I like to spend time with it and have learned to let the art that wants to happen happen. So I'll typically come to a set with some basic ideas, and I'll always say, I'm going to try like 5 things, but I only ever get to 2 of them. And then I will have, you know, anywhere from 5 to 700 images that I'll sit and I'll take a look at. And then the post-production, going in and manipulating the photo will take me really like getting into like almost being a different person. Like it's a time where it can't be interrupted. So it's kind of like, you know how you can email and you can do like small things a little bit. Like when you're in post-production, it's kind of a painterly process, and I'll just take 2 to 4 days to be a weirdo and like not come out of my studio and to try and get it right. It's when you can change it artistically. It's when you can collage things together. You can make it more than just what the negative was. And then there's printing it. So I print all of my own work. That can take anywhere from 2 days to 5 days. So I would say like 2 or 3 months, but there's multiple parts of the photographic process. There's, the world building, there's the shoot, there's the editing, and then there's the printing. And so usually about 2 to 3 months, I probably only make about 3 to 5 images a year. And so it helps that I've been doing it for a long time. I do have a book. It's my first monograph that has about 65 of my photographs from about the last 15 years. It's available at Radius Books. And so that's a way to see this and a little bit more in the printed form. Yes, ma'am.
Just curious, have your son and daughter, aside from being subjects and worthy collaborators, are they wanting to continue your legacy? Do they have interest in the arts in some form?
That's a great question. So I have 3 kids. Our daughter is 22, and she is an English major with an emphasis in creative writing. She wants to do screenplays, and I watched her grow up. She was a dancer in high school. She can make pottery and she can draw, but she's really gifted all the way artistically. I have a now 20-year-old son that is going into his junior year in vocal performance with an emphasis in opera. He's a tenor, and so he's a musical artist, but they're all visual artists as well, but have chosen, they're so young, they still have so much time to do whatever they want, but he's a incredible vocal artist. And then our 13-year-old just wants to play sports. And he wants to do the opposite of whatever I tell him, and I think he might be the artist. So I think at 13, that's all I wanted to do too, was play sports. But that's how that's going. So.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. I'm very interested in, you mentioned working with students, and I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about that as far as Do you direct them? Do you let them decide what they do? How do you work with your young people?
So I was able to work with the students at Dartmouth College, and so much of the collaborative process comes in for me with every single one of the pieces that I'm making. It kind of brings up this bigger subject of Native American people having agency in their depiction. And so it's something that is really, really important to me, is not telling the story for them, but kind of culling and, you know, collaborating on whether it's appropriate stories that can be told or stories that are important to understand cross-culturally, to like maybe give human understanding to where we are as contemporary peoples. When I came to the students at Dartmouth, they knew the body of work, and we kind of went over different ideas, and they knew that they wanted to do doll boxes, and they knew that they wanted to work underwater. And so that's when I kind of stepped in and began helping with storytelling about, you know, relationship for Pacific peoples to water. We began to talk about hula and what some of their stories that were appropriate to tell. The other girls wanted to make a first American doll box, and they wanted to have agency over that love and detail, right? Because their culture has been so appropriated, and we can all think of what we think luau and hula culture is, and for Hawaiian Kanaka Maoli people, it's doesn't have that love and understanding from within communities. So that's one way the collaboration works, is kind of helping people tell their own stories, and then even more than that, like going to the greater community. Sometimes it's checking in with uncle, sometimes it's checking in with grandma. We're beholden to really strict cultural protocols, each one of our communities, and so that part of the collaborative process is really important to me. Is there's only certain things that we're allowed to tell. So you'll see in the body of work, things like ceremony are not there, right? We're not talking about ceremony, we're not talking about culturally private things, we're talking about much more modern issues that are okay to tell. And so that's part of the collaborative process. With the kids back home, I think a lot of it is just, you know, having grown up there, and it's some of the first art making that informed who I am today, and I just kind of want to give back. And so that's where I'm at, like really for the last year, is creating workshops for the kids back home that I don't see going on anymore. And when I would go home for the summers as a young person, there would be beading, there would be moccasin making, there would be basket weaving, there would be flint knapping, there would be all of these cultural activities. And I really started thinking about how those lessons really made me want to be an artist, or always knew that it was like a best friend or available, or maybe that I was good at it, all of those types of things. Like, where did those ladies come from? I think they were just volunteering their time, you know, and really wanting to give back and transmit culture. And so that was, you know, kind of where I was at in my thinking of like, this is actually my responsibility, having had the fortunate time as a young person to get to know those people, to now give back my time. And so I'm going into these collaborative workshops back home, not with too many intentions about what I'm going to make as far as like the photographic process, but just wanting to play and teach them like where to find the materials back home is really important, and how to process and how to play with them. And so we're gonna be making costumes of our local resident animals, using processing local materials, so clay, yucca, willow, pine nuts, tule, things that I learned how to play with when I was a kid. I'm gonna teach them how to play with. And so that's what that looks like.
Well, I think that we are out of time for any more questions, but Cara, thank you so much for all of your time this
Thank
evening.
you all for coming out
Thank
this
you all
evening.
for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.